There is a photograph from April 1945 that says more than any speech this man ever gave, a body hung upside down at a gas station in Milan, while the crowd that once adored him hurls stones at the corpse. Benito Mussolini ruled Italy for 20 years by manufacturing an image of unstoppable strength, the man who made the trains run on time, who promised the return of Rome's imperial glory. That image was, in essence, theater, and when the curtain finally fell, there was nothing behind it but emptiness. Few reigns in modern history have shown the gap between the perception and the substance of power so clearly. Mussolini's case is worth studying precisely because his fall was so sudden compared to 20 years of apparent invincibility, a lesson in just how long emptiness can hide behind a convincing performance. Mussolini understood something many authoritarian leaders would later copy, that the perception of power, if projected persistently and consistently enough, can temporarily substitute for real power. Before becoming a fascist dictator, he was a journalist, a man who deeply understood how narratives are shaped, how an image travels to the masses faster than a fact. His entire political project was built around spectacle, mass rallies at Piazza Venezia, his signature pose with his chin raised. The rhetoric of ancient Rome meant to convince Italians they were heirs to an empire reclaiming its place in the sun. Institutionally, the fascist state under Mussolini was far less efficient than the propaganda claimed. Behind the facade of discipline and order lay corruption, incompetence, and deep rivalries within the party itself. Mussolini deliberately cultivated rivalry among his subordinates, keeping them at odds with one another so that none could accumulate enough power to threaten him. This tactic protected his position in the short term, but in the long run, it impoverished the Italian state at precisely the moment it needed competent administration most in the run up to and during the Second World War. His obsession with the image of strength led him into military adventures. Italy was not prepared for the invasion of Greece. Campaigns and Africa ventures launched more for appearances than strategic necessity. When those ventures failed, so did the myth that was the only real foundation of his rule. The very word fascism comes from the Latin fasces, a bundle of rods bound around an axe, an ancient Roman symbol of authority that Mussolini deliberately recycled so that every poster, every building, and every uniform would remind citizens of an alleged continuity with the imperial past. This aesthetic strategy was extremely effective at manufacturing a sense of legitimacy without the need to actually earn it through functional governance or economic progress. Especially instructive is the relationship between Mussolini and his later ally, Adolf Hitler. In the early years of the fascist movement, Mussolini was the older and more influential of the two, a model the young German movement openly imitated. But while Hitler built a state with clear, if criminal, industrial, and military capacity, Mussolini's Italy remained, in essence, a poor country dressed in the uniform of an empire. When the war finally demanded real military strength rather than parade ground strength, the difference between the two regimes became painfully obvious. Italy became the junior, dependent partner in an alliance it had once inspired. Mussolini's relationship to criticism was that of a man who believed legitimacy was something to be performed rather than earned. Control of the press was absolute. Newspapers reported only good news. Military defeats were presented as tactical withdrawals, and any sign of internal discontent was suppressed by the secret police before it could reach the public. But what ultimately betrayed Mussolini was not outside opposition, but his own inner circle. When it became clear the war was heading toward catastrophe, when Allied forces landed in Sicily in 1943, it was members of the Grand Council of Fascism men he himself had appointed who voted to remove him. 20 years of controlling information and eliminating criticism did not prevent an internal collapse the moment even his closest allies realized the myth was spent. Mussolini had believed his own propaganda for so long that he failed to notice the moment his own inner circle stopped believing it too. It is telling that after the vote that removed him, Mussolini went to King Victor Emmanuel III expecting that, as so many times before, his personal charisma and standing would be enough to turn the situation back in his favor. Instead, he was arrested that same day. That seen an all-powerful dictator arrested almost administratively, without resistance, without crowds taking to the streets to defend him, best illustrates how dependent his power truly was on the continued consent of institutions that he had, paradoxically, left formally intact, like the monarchy, instead of fully replacing them with his own apparatus. This dynamic, a rule built on spectacle that collapses the moment it faces a real test, has a clear parallel in the reign of the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang, whose empire, built on monumental projects and rigid control of the narrative, fell apart only a few years after his death, because it had been sustained by fear alone rather than genuine institutional cohesion. A similar fate befell the French Emperor Napoleon III, whose authority, built largely on inheritance and symbolism, collapsed almost overnight following military defeat at Sedan in 1870. The common thread in these cases is the illusion that spectacle and propaganda can permanently substitute for real governing capacity. As long as the system is not tested by a serious crisis, such a rule can appear solid. But crisis always comes, and that is when the difference becomes visible between genuine institutional strength and the kind that existed only on posters and in speeches. Interestingly, this dynamic is not limited to military defeats. A similar logic is visible in the corporate world, among companies that build market value entirely on the marketing image of a visionary leader without the corresponding operational substance underneath. When the first serious stress test arrives in economic crisis, the loss of a key partner, a public scandal, the illusion collapses at the same speed as Mussolini's regime in 1943, because there was never any real resilience, only a well-rehearsed performance of resilience. Mussolini's fate teaches us something uncomfortable about the nature of power built on image. Such power is extremely effective in peacetime, when no one tests its foundations, but becomes lethally fragile in a moment of crisis, precisely when it is needed most. A man who spent 20 years performing unstoppable strength could not in the end escape his own people, his own allies, or his own image, an image he had built for too long to ever be able to fulfill it with reality. There is a warning in this story for every era. When power is built on projection rather than substance, the bill is not paid gradually, it comes due all at once. The moment reality can no longer be postponed with rhetoric. The final act of Mussolini's story, his body put on display like a trophy, in the same square where he once received ovations, functions almost like a deliberate message from history to itself. That a people who once agreed to applaud the spectacle carry an equal capacity to turn on it the moment the spectacle can no longer convincingly conceal the reality underneath.